Well, get ready for more Betty Boop, Pluto the dog, and Nancy Drew. Thousands of copyrighted works dating back to 1930 officially became public domain at the start of this year.
In 1932, the New York Supreme Court, Helen Kane was reportedly seated across from Max Fleischer as the courtroom turned into a battle over the true voice behind Betty Boop. According to court records, a valuation of $250,000 was placed on a single animated voice, something neither side could fully justify. Reportedly, even as arguments escalated, it emerged that neither Helen Kane nor Fleischer actually originated the voice, pointing instead to an earlier, uncredited source performance. How did a simple cartoon short turn into an explosive legal war that exposed the darkest secrets of the music industry? We have to go back to the drawing board of 1930. The Cabaret Canine, that fierce 1932 legal battle over the rights to her famous voice, completely overlooked a much more unsettling truth hidden deep inside the animation archives. Long before she became a polished pop culture icon, one of the world's most recognizable animated sex symbols actually started her existence as a bizarre interspecies cartoon romance. Fact number 1. The Poodle Origin. On August 9, 1930, audiences walked into theaters to watch a talk-cartoon short called Dizzy Dishes, completely unaware they were witnessing a historic debut. Except that the character on screen was not a glamorous human girl at all. According to the official historical design archives at Fleischer Studios, animator Grim Natwick was simply tasked with creating a new musical character to perform a popular jazz song. Here is the thing that completely flips the legend on its head. Fact number 2. Grim Natwick's mistake. Natwick sat down at his drawing board and designed an unnamed anthropomorphic French poodle with floppy dog ears and a button nose. Based on the production history detailed on Wikipedia, he drew a canine simply because he assumed the studio wanted another animal sidekick, never bothering to ask if management preferred a human lady. This brings up a wild question about the early animation industry as a whole. Did those pioneer animators view the line between animals and humans as completely blurred? Or did they just value shocking visual surrealism over basic everyday logic? Think about that for a second, because the reality was incredibly weird. Fact number 3. The romantic crossbreed. This singing poodle was explicitly created to be the on-screen romantic girlfriend of Bimbo, a literal cartoon street dog. Try to picture this world-famous glamorous fashion icon as a floppy-eared hound serving food in a chaotic singing cartoon kitchen while a dog flirted with her. It was a chaotic animal crossbreed relationship. But the crowds in 1930 absolutely loved it. And get this, the strange canine design proved to be an instant, massive success for the studio. But as theater audiences grew increasingly obsessed with her look, the executives realized they had a unique problem on their hands. They recognized that an actual human canine romance would limit her appeal. So they decided to perform a radical surgical modification entirely on paper. Why did those floppy poodle ears suddenly disappear in the next design phase? Fact number 4. Ear surgery. Those floppy poodle ears vanished because the studio realized that an actual cartoon dog simply could not command the massive box office numbers of a human sex symbol. To fix this, the creative team pulled off a technical and artistic deception that completely transformed an animal into a mainstream icon. According to the official animation history sheets preserved from Fleischer Studios, her transition was not a sudden redesign, but rather a slow, frame-by-frame erasure of her canine ancestry. Think about that for a second, because her most famous fashion statement was literally born from this anatomical cover-up. In the 1932 short, Any Rags, those long, hanging hound ears were simply sketched into circles, instantly turning her dog flaps into iconic gold hoop earrings. Fact number 5. The nose job. Now, here is where the technical manipulation got even weirder. Her tiny, button-like human nose did not start out dainty. It was originally a wet, black canine nose that animators slowly shrank over a grueling 18-month period. It makes you wonder what the early Hollywood studio system really thought about its audience, especially when they could seamlessly convert animal anatomy into sexualized female jewelry without anyone questioning the transition. They valued theater profits over basic biological logic, and the strategy worked perfectly. But wait, the studio did not rely solely on its internal team to complete this radical transformation. Fact number 6. Walter Lance's secret hand. Based on biographical profiles published by the Hollywood Animation Archive, the studio secretly brought in animator Walter Lance, the brilliant mind who later created Woody Woodpecker, to refine her final human model sheets. If you examine the archival footage closely, you can actually visualize the precise moment her fur disappeared, and her face smoothed out into a perfect human flapper. Lance stabilized her proportions, turning a strange animal hybrid into the ultimate animated starlet. And get this, the newly humanized character instantly became an absolute goldmine, generating millions of dollars in theatrical revenue for Fleischer Studios. This massive mountain of corporate cash quickly caught the eye of a desperate, bankrupt live-action singer who watched the cartoon and claimed her entire identity had been stolen. She was completely ready to burn down the studio to claim those profits, setting up a legal war that shook the entire entertainment world. Who was this real-life performer waiting in the shadows? The bankruptcy trap. Helen Kane didn't walk into the courtroom as a confident star. She walked in as someone trying to stop her entire life from slipping through her fingers. By the early 1930s, the Great Depression had already rewritten the rules of entertainment in New York. According to entertainment contract records referenced in archival summaries on Tralfaz blog's court documentation analysis, Kane had once been earning around $8,000 a week on Broadway at her peak. Think about that for a second. $8,000 a week in a world where most people were just trying to survive the next day. But that kind of money doesn't hold when the economy collapses. By the time Paramount Pictures let her contract expire, that income had vanished almost overnight, leaving her in a position that reportedly felt nothing like the glamorous image she had built her career on. And here's where everything starts to tighten. Fact number 7. The $8,000 collapse. What looked like unstoppable fame quietly disintegrated as the Depression hit full force. According to theater industry reports cited in the University of Pittsburgh's Entertainment Law Archives hosted on Purdue's digital collections, performers like Kane were among the first to feel the financial shock. One season, she was headlining. The next, she was effectively cut loose, replaced by cheaper acts as studios tightened budgets and shifted focus toward animation, which was far more cost-efficient to produce and distribute. Now here's the thing that makes this even more intense. While Kane was scrambling for roles, something completely different was happening on the animation side of the industry. Fact number 8. Merchandising monopoly. Betty Boop was exploding. According to animation merchandising histories referenced in Tralfaz's research breakdown of early Fleischer licensing deals, the character had already become one of the first animated figures to generate serious global merchandising revenue. We're talking makeup compacts, porcelain dolls, perfume branding, all built around a cartoon character who didn't even exist in physical form. And unlike live performers, she didn't need to renegotiate contracts. She didn't demand salary increases. She didn't age out of the audience's attention. She just kept being drawn, frame after frame, while her image quietly printed money in ways real performers couldn't compete with. You can almost feel the imbalance there. One woman is losing roles. Another woman is becoming a commercial machine. And that's where things start to turn personal. Fact number 9. The desperation lawsuit. On May 4th, 1932, Helen Kane filed her now infamous lawsuit demanding $250,000 in damages, directly targeting Max Fleischer and Paramount Pictures. According to court filings analyzed in Tralfaz's breakdown of the case, she claimed Betty Boop was a wrongful caricature of her voice, style, and performance identity, essentially arguing that the studio had built a profitable empire by copying her public persona without permission. But what makes this moment so explosive is not just the claim itself, it's the timing. Kane wasn't filing this during her peak. She wasn't protecting a thriving career. She was filing after the collapse, after the contracts dried up, after the money had already moved on to animation. And get this, while she was preparing her legal battle, Betty Boop's merchandise was already spreading across department stores, theaters, and international distributors, pulling in revenue that dwarfed anything Kane had ever earned in her later years. So you've got this shocking contrast building in real time. A fading performer trying to reclaim ownership of a voice she believed defined her, while a cartoon version of that same style was becoming a financial engine for an entire studio system. Helen Kane might have believed she was stepping into court to defend her identity, but Paramount's legal team was preparing something far more aggressive behind the scenes. Something that didn't just challenge her claim. It threatened to expose her entire public image. When they opened her history files, what exactly were they about to find hidden in her past that could flip this entire case on its head? Courtroom absurdity. The courtroom in New York wasn't just hearing testimony anymore, it was being attacked by it. Justice Edward J. McGoldrick is reportedly trying to maintain order in a room that feels more like a vaudeville stage than a Supreme Court hearing. According to Associated Press, wire summaries later referenced in court trial reconstructions of Tralfaz's archival breakdown of the case, the moment Helen Kane's vocal style was demonstrated in open court, the entire legal atmosphere began to collapse into something nobody had prepared for. You've got lawyers objecting, witnesses interrupting, and then this strange, almost surreal layer underneath it all, sound itself becoming evidence. And then things snapped. Fact number 10. The stenographer's strike. The official court stenographer, responsible for recording every word into a legal transcript, reportedly stopped mid-session and declared he could not continue. According to trial reconstructions preserved in Tralfaz's analysis of the proceedings, he essentially threw up his hands and admitted that the boops and jazz scat vocalizations being demonstrated in court could not be translated into any readable shorthand system. Think about that for a second. A courtroom built on a precise written record suddenly hits a wall because language itself breaks down in real time. No dictionary for nonsense syllables. No legal spelling for performance sound. And it didn't get calmer after that. Fact number 11. Censored scatting. As testimony continued, Justice McGoldrick reportedly became visibly frustrated with the constant vocal demonstrations filling the courtroom. According to Associated Press wire excerpts cited in Tralfaz's trial documentation, he eventually ordered that several of the so-called boops be physically removed from the official transcript, neither corrected nor interpreted. Removed. As if the sounds themselves were so disruptive to legal order that even writing them down was unacceptable. You don't usually think of court records as something that can be censored for being too noisy, but that's exactly what happened here. The legal system is trying and failing to contain pure performance. But the strangest moment was still coming. Fact number 12. The voice wardrobe. The defense team brought in multiple live voice performers to demonstrate that Helen Kane's signature vocal style was not unique, including a performer identified in court records as Little Ann Little, who openly replicated the same high-pitched, babyish scatting style during testimony. According to Tralfaz's reconstruction of courtroom accounts, her delivery wasn't subtle or restrained. She leaned into it, performing the voice in a way that almost mocked the seriousness of the case itself, turning the witness stand into something that felt dangerously close to a stage act. And here's where the tension flips. Because now the courtroom isn't just arguing about ownership. It's watching identity being performed, repeated, copied, and reshaped in real time in front of judges who are trying and failing to treat it like normal evidence. And while the judges struggled with that question inside the courthouse, something even more unstable was happening outside on the streets of Manhattan, where the boundary between performance and reality was starting to dissolve in a completely different way. What happens when that same identity confusion spills out of the courtroom and lands in the middle of a crowded city store where nobody is prepared for it? The boutique illusion. Those unspellable jazz scat sounds echoing through the courtroom legal records proved that the public could no longer separate real vocal artists from the animated product, according to historical New York media logs compiled by Tralfaz. The Betty Boop phenomenon completely warped public perception on the streets of Manhattan. Try to transport yourself directly into the crowded, high-tension atmosphere of a 1930s retail shop caught in this literal celebrity identity crisis. Real women were walking around sounding exactly like the drawing, and it triggered what historians call the boutique brawl. Fact number 13, the boutique brawl. Voice actress Bonnie Poe entered a high-end Manhattan dress shop. Still, when she spoke normally, a clerk loudly mistook her voice for Helen Kane, sparking a massive public argument over who actually owned that famous face and sound. Here is the thing that makes that retail shouting match so fascinating. Poe was legally trapped because she could not even tell the store clerk that she was the actual voice behind the cartoon. This calculated omission leads us directly to a discovery. Fact number 14. The Ghost Singers. Fleischer Studios deliberately hid the true identities of all their voice actresses from the public to maintain a profitable corporate illusion that Betty Boop was a single living entity. But wait, think about the deeper implications of that corporate secrecy for a second. When a corporate cartoon character becomes more recognizable than the real human artists who created it, do the human lose their right to their own identity? The undeniable truth is that the studio's marketing was so incredibly powerful that the real women providing those vocals were completely erased and swallowed by their own animated caricature. Corporate profits entirely overrode individual human credit, leaving the actual talent stranded in total obscurity, while the cartoon conquered the world. And get this, while the public remained entirely distracted by these bizarre identity mix-ups in retail dress shops, Paramount's corporate attorneys were moving in a completely different direction. They ignored the mainstream theater scene and began quietly digging through the underground jazz clubs of Harlem. What they unearthed in the dark, smoky corners of the legendary Cotton Club would change the entire legal case forever. Who was the real source of the echo hiding in that nightclub? The stolen echo of Harlem. The courtroom didn't just hear a new argument. It heard the origin of the entire boop sound, finally brought to light. By this point in the timeline, Paramount's legal team is no longer guessing. They're building a case that reaches far beyond Helen Kane and even beyond Max Fleischer. According to testimony later referenced in Wikipedia's historical account of baby Esther, And corroborated in Harlem World magazine's archival reporting on Esther Jones, the voice everyone is fighting over didn't begin in Broadway theaters at all. It began with a child. A 10-year-old performer from Harlem named Esther Lee Jones, known on stage as Baby Esther, who could turn simple syllables into a rhythmic musical pattern that audiences instantly remembered. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Fact number 15. The Harlem Source. Baby Esther Jones, as documented in multiple historical reconstructions, including Griot Mag's cultural profile of her career, was performing a distinctive boop-boop-a-doop style scat in Harlem venues years before it ever appeared in mainstream animation. Think about that for a second. A child barely old enough to understand the scale of what she was creating, already shaping a sound that would later be packaged, renamed, and sold worldwide without her name attached to it. She wasn't imitating anyone. She was the source. Now keep that in your mind, because the next detail flips everything again. Fact number 16. The Everglades theft. According to court logs and entertainment history summaries cited in Tralfaz's breakdown of the case materials, Helen Kane reportedly attended a performance by Baby Esther at the Everglades Club in April 1928. Witness accounts suggest she was seated in the front row during Esther's act, watching the child perform the now famous boo-boo-boo vocal style. Days later, Kane allegedly recorded her own version of the same pattern for commercial use. No transformation, no reinterpretation, just replication, almost note for note in structure and rhythm, later refined for Broadway audiences. And suddenly the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. A child performs, a star observes, a studio system profits. But while that sound was being lifted into a mainstream entertainment, the child behind it wasn't protected at all. Fact number 17. Criminalized talent. In June 1928, according to legal records referenced in Harlem World magazine's historical reporting, Baby Esther's manager was arrested in New York on child labor violations. The charge wasn't about creativity or performance quality. It was about the legality of letting a child appear on stage late at night. So, at the exact moment her vocal style was spreading through Broadway circuits and eventually into animation culture, the infrastructure around her was collapsing under legal pressure. And here's the contradiction that hits hardest. The voice becomes iconic in wealthy entertainment spaces, but the person who created it is entirely pushed out of those same spaces. You start to see how the system actually works. The performance gets preserved. The performer gets erased. And if Paramount could prove this timeline in court, if they could show that the boop sound existed in Harlem long before Helen Kane ever stepped on a Broadway stage, then Kane's entire claim doesn't just weaken, it collapses. So what exactly broke down at the worst possible moment? Right when history was about to speak for itself. The midnight repair. 1 second, the movie tone recording of Baby Esther is holding the entire room together. Next, it physically breaks apart, the strip of film tearing during handling and throwing the sound and image completely out of sync. According to archival reconstructions cited in Tralfaz's trial breakdown, the playback didn't just glitch, it unraveled in real time before Justice McGoldrick, rendering the strongest piece of evidence unusable. And you could feel the shift immediately. Everything else in the case suddenly looked uncertain. Fact number 18. The Broken Master. The 1928 movie tone sound recording was supposed to end the argument. A clean, undeniable capture of Baby Esther's voice from Harlem, preserved on film in a way that could survive scrutiny. But as noted in Harlem World magazine's archival coverage of Esther Jones's recordings, the physical medium itself became the weakness. During preparation for courtroom playback, the strip slipped out of alignment, with the audio drifting away from the visuals until what remained sounded distorted, disconnected, and almost unusable as legal proof. Think about that for a second. A case about ownership of a voice collapsing because the voice itself can't stay attached to its own image. Now everything depends on repair, not argument. Fact number 19. The Night of the Slugs. According to studio records referenced in Tralfaz's reconstruction of the trial logistics, a senior film cutter, Kitty Pfister, was brought in under emergency conditions to salvage the recording before the next court session. No audience, no recognition. Just a dark editing room, damaged reels, and a ticking deadline that carried real financial weight for Paramount. She reportedly worked for nearly 20 straight hours, manually inserting black film slugs into the damaged strip, carefully respacing frames so the audio track would line back up with the image. No machines are fixing it automatically, just precise cuts, patient alignment, and constant rechecking under pressure that didn't let up. And somehow, it held. By the time the evidence was replayed, the recording was stable enough to be used in court. Not perfect, but intact. Enough for the defense to argue continuity. Enough to show that the sound existed long before Helen Kane's claim ever reached a legal filing. That moment changed everything. On May 5, 1934, Justice McGoldrick dismissed the lawsuit entirely, siding with Paramount and confirming Betty Boop as a legally protected studio creation. According to court summaries in Tralfaz's legal analysis, the ruling effectively erased Kane's claim from the official record. But the victory didn't settle anything outside the courtroom. Because while the studio was celebrating, something far bigger was already moving in the background, and it had nothing to do with performers or copyright disputes. It had to do with federal power. Why would Washington suddenly care about a cartoon voice after the case was already finished? Execution by code. The victory didn't last long enough for anyone to enjoy it. Because just 2 months after Paramount walked out of court with their legal win, a completely different kind of power stepped in, and this one didn't care about evidence, testimony, or creative history. It cared about morality on paper. According to animation history studies cited by Cartoon Brew's analysis of the Hays Code era enforcement, Joseph Breen's Production Code Administration began aggressively tightening control over what could and couldn't appear on screen in mid-1934. Early animation studios were among the first targets, and Betty Boop was right in the crosshairs. Fact number 20. The Joseph Breen execution. What followed wasn't a lawsuit or a negotiation. It was an enforced redesign of a cultural icon. As documented in historical retrospectives such as Gurney Journey's breakdown of Betty Boop's evolution, the character's defining features were systematically stripped away to comply with the Hays Code. Her dresses were lengthened, her curves softened, her heels lowered until the flapper energy that defined her original appeal was almost completely erased. Even her signature companions didn't survive the purge, with Bimbo the dog quietly removed from continuity as studios rushed to sanitize anything that could be interpreted as suggestive or too adult for the new rules. Think about that shift for a second. The same character who just survived a high-stakes courtroom battle over identity is now being rewritten at the design table by federal moral standards. And it wasn't subtle. The pre-code Betty Boop existed in a world of jazz clubs, exaggerated rhythm, and unapologetic adult charm, reflecting the same chaotic cultural energy that defined early American animation. But post-code, everything becomes restrained. Movements tighten. Expressions soften. The personality that once carried the entire Fleischer brand starts to dissolve into something far more controlled, almost sterile. You can actually feel the audience reaction shift in real time. According to animation historians cited in Cartoon Brew's research on pre-code censorship, studios saw a rapid decline in engagement as audiences who were drawn to the original irreverence slowly stopped recognizing the character they had once loved. Not because she disappeared, but because she was fundamentally changed into something unrecognizable. And here's the part that hits hardest. This wasn't a creative decision. It was compliance. A federal framework had stepped in and effectively rewritten one of the most recognizable animated figures in American history, not through debate, but through enforced limitation. Every design adjustment carried the same message. This version of femininity, this version of humor, this version of cultural expression needed to be controlled. And once that control was in place, there was no going back. Stripped of her edge, stripped of her supporting cast, and stripped of the jazz energy that made her iconic, Betty Boop's original audience didn't just drift away. They stopped responding entirely, which left Fleischer Studios staring at a collapsing star with one brutal question before them. If the original version is no longer allowed to exist, what happens when the studio decides to replace her rather than restore her? The Sally Swing betrayal. The last version of Betty Boop didn't walk away on her own. She was quietly replaced before her own audience. By 1939, the Fleischer pipeline was no longer experimenting. It was complying. According to production notes referenced in Gurney Journey's archival breakdown of late-era Betty Boop shorts, the studio released a heavily sanitized cartoon structured around a talent show format. On paper, it looked harmless enough, a cheerful stage, light performances, controlled humor, but everything about it feels engineered to erase what came before it. And you can feel that erasure in every frame. In this final iteration, Betty Boop is no longer the unpredictable jazz-era flapper audiences once loved. She's been flattened into a host role, guiding a clean, structured talent show where nothing crosses the line of the Hays Code restrictions. The movement is restrained, the humor is softened. Even her expressions feel carefully measured, like someone constantly watching from off-screen to make sure she doesn't become too much again. And then comes the replacement. According to studio production records discussed in Gurney Journey's analysis of the period, Fleischer Studios introduced a new character named Sally Swing, designed as a modernized, safe alternative to Betty Boop. Same basic silhouette, same audience targeting, but stripped of the jazz attitude, the flirtation, the chaotic charm that made Betty recognizable in the first place. It wasn't evolution, it was a substitution. Think about that for a second. A studio looking at a cultural icon and deciding the solution isn't to restore her, but to replace her with a controlled version they can better manage. And the audience noticed immediately. As documented in late-era animation reception summaries cited by Gurney Journey, the response to Sally Swing was almost instant and brutally clear. Audiences didn't connect with her. They didn't accept her as an extension of Betty Boop, and they certainly didn't treat her as a replacement. Within months, interest collapsed, and the entire character line lost traction across theatrical distribution channels. No gradual fade, just rejection. And here's the irony that sits underneath all of it. The studio tried to preserve its franchise by removing everything that made it valuable in the first place. Instead of protecting Betty Boop, they dismantled her, rebuilt her into something unrecognizable, and then watched the audience walk away from the imitation without hesitation. By the time Paramount fully pulled back from the character line, there was nothing left to salvage. Not the original energy, not the audience trust, not even the illusion that the replacement was working. And yet, decades later, long after the short stopped airing and the studio system moved on, something unexpected would happen. According to historical research published by Griot magazine, the billion-dollar Betty Boop empire was built entirely on a stolen vocal echo belonging to a child prodigy who died with empty pockets. That undeniable reality finally restores true credit to Harlem's baby Esther Lee Jones rather than to modern merchandise profits. Which specific revelation changed how you view classic animation icons?